Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll give it a few more minutes or one more minute to let more people join, and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 11:32, so I think we should start. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on data integrity. We're very happy to have you join us. My name is Mo, and I'm the creative director at Quest Mindshare. Today's webinar stems from a joint co-authored article by the Martec Group and Quest Mindshare, where we explored one of the most important and pressing topics in the market research industry, fraud and data quality. And of course, those are frequently spoken about themes that truly touch every corner of our field, influencing the credibility, reliability, and really the overall impact of the insights that we deliver. So today we'll walk through some of the key highlights from that article, share perspectives from both organizations on how to safeguard data integrity, and discuss a case study that brings some of those challenges and solutions to life. Finally, we'll open up the floor for a Q&A, so please feel free to send through your questions on the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences. Once again, thank you all for taking the time to join us. We're looking forward to a great discussion on how we, as a collective force, whether you're a brand or a researcher or research services and providers, can continue to strengthen the trust and quality behind the data. We'd like to hear from you too, so look out for some polls that we'll launch during our discussion. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Ken Donaven joining us. Ken is a partner at the Martec Group and has worked in the industry for over 25 years, delivering hundreds of survey-based B2B and consumer research studies. We also have Kyle Hope on the Quest side. Kyle is Director of Partnerships and Supply and has been working with quantitative data delivery systems for almost 10 years. And now I'll pass it over to you, Ken.
Excellent. Thanks, Mo. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So this idea of fraud, data fraud, and understanding the differences between low-quality data and fraudulent data has been an ongoing debate for quite a while, and it has a significant impact on the field work that we do, the trust we have with our clients. Recently, we've had more conversations about data fraud in the past maybe 6 months than probably the last 5 years combined. It is top of mind for a lot of people, and a lot of people are talking about bots or AI. And you know, that happens. There certainly are instances where we're getting attacked by bots, but really the biggest threat to data integrity isn't bots or AI, it's people. The fraudulent people are coming often from survey farms. They do their best to mimic genuine respondents. They're often using AI as a tool to try to fool the system. We have systems in place to protect against that on the back end from a quality perspective, but they're really trying to outsmart some of those traditional detection tools, essentially so they can play the system for profit. They're trying to get the incentives that we offer to fill the samples that we need.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about data quality in general, we always want to make the distinction between fraud and low quality data. Not all low quality data is fraudulent, and not all fraudulent data is low quality. So it's good to understand the distinction between the two. But as Ken had mentioned, you know, a lot of clients over the years that we've dealt with have flagged bot activity in their surveys, but in reality, a lot of the times, the vast majority of fraud is committed by humans, like click farms, or, you know, we've seen in the past WhatsApp groups that share the exact cheat sheet to get in through screeners and surveys. So today we tend to see a lot more fraudulent activity from the human side of the equation than the bots. That's not to say they don't exist, but that's typically what we see today. And when we look at fraud prevention in general, I look at it as a forever a moving set of goalposts. It's, the stuff that we're doing today is not always going to work tomorrow. And as we approach kind of full adoption for AI usage and integration, we'll probably need to watch the bot issue a bit more closely as you can scale that type of tech at a much higher level today than you could a few years ago. But as it stands today, right now, our biggest threat is the human side of fraud. And it's good for us to understand that AI is not just a threat, when it comes to data quality and fraud. It's also a tool that we as researchers can leverage to combat it as well.
Okay, we have our first poll that should shoot up on your screen any second now. How confident are you that your current survey data is fraud-free? Okay. So you should be able to submit that, and I will move on.
So the impetus for the article that we wrote and published was a very specific project. We were doing some brand and pricing research for a client that is in the vehicle aftermarket products space. So we were doing research in the US and Canada. We had a pretty aggressive sample size of 1,000 completes in the US. And we had some very specific quotas and product requirements in place. So we kind of knew going in that this was going to be a difficult recruit. It's kind of a niche market. There were very specific product requirements, and we were balancing multiple quotas. So we had regionality, we had to look at customer size, we had to look at the specific product type that they were purchasing or had purchased. And because of those very specific requirements, we were hyper vigilant from the get-go that we could have the potential for some fraudulent activity.
All right.
So with that in mind, we launched the field work, and we immediately had some challenges. We saw some IP addresses that didn't make sense. We had a lot of multiple same source logins. Some of the open-end responses made us believe that we were dealing with survey farms because of literal comments in the open ends about location. We had a lot of low knowledge answers that also kind of triggered us to think this is not just bad quality. And some of these things were happening in sufficient quality or quantity, excuse me, to make us again think it was more about a fraudulent issue. Now, the key thing to remember here is we had these suspicions going in because of the type of project and the size and scope of the project. This is not to suggest that every time we do a B2B field work like this, we suspect there will be significant fraud, but because of the challenges that we knew going in, that's why we were so vigilant from the jump.
Yeah, and I think some of the issues you've mentioned are pretty common to everyone who runs any form of online quant research. Especially when we talk about niche audiences or very difficult quotas to reach. Often, as us as a panel company, and we see with other providers, we want to deliver for our clients. So there's different tools in which we can open things up in terms of trying to hit certain audiences to try and get that. But when we look at a lot of this stuff, what Ken probably saw was a lot of this happens before you've put some of the best practices in place that we as a data collection company do, some of which are leveraging res tech tools, putting in processes or software that you can really combat some of these issues that we see. And another big key for data collection and just researchers in general is to really take a collaborative and agile approach when we look at field work or data cleaning. And, whenever we run data cleaning, we should be doing so on a fairly regular basis. And that feedback loop needs to remain open across not just, the research company and your providers. That feedback loop really helps everyone tackle it from a better perspective and gives everyone trust across the board because we're all working collaboratively for one goal.
Yeah, and to that point, Kyle, for a project like this, we don't necessarily do this for every project, but for a project like this, we're doing daily data checks, sometimes multiple times a day, to identify if we do have red flags. As soon as those issues arose, we were immediately on the phone with Quest so that we could work together in that collaborative way that Kyle mentioned to address the issues.
So when we look at some of the preventative measures that we put in place, we've got a few different tools that we leverage, but one of which is an in-house proprietary software that our project managers use. The other piece is using a third-party tool called Detect. And what Detect does is it really uses both active and passive checks in real time to provide scoring for each respondent, just to determine whether, they may be good, bad, or suspicious. And what they do is they track a variety of metadata on the respondent level before the respondent hits our system or even the survey. And what we look at is things like device fingerprint, IP, any location spoofing, browser settings, any plugins that have been downloaded or attached to their browser. There's a variety of different methods that we look at today, but leveraging these ResTech software solutions is really a big game changer when it comes to preventing fraud. But yeah, when we see a lot of the metadata that comes in, a lot of this isn't just looked at in isolation. It's looked at across the board. It doesn't just focus on one individual red flag per se. It looks at patterns across multiple participants or multiple sources. And where we've seen this help not only ourselves if we've ever had a very, very large study, but we've seen from other clients and other ResTech tools that it really helps keep everyone in check, and it really does prevent a lot of the fraud before it even gets to the survey. So, but aside from using some of the latest and greatest ResTech tools that are in the marketplace, there's some additional strategies that we take to prevent fraud. And that starts within our panel management team and kind of finishes along with incentives. So we'll briefly touch on some of those. So one of the processes we typically do as a data collection company is we look at pre-survey screening before the respondent even hits the survey. So a lot of this is done within kind of the panel management side of it, but it can also be done before a respondent is sent into a survey. So there are a lot of consumer panels that rely purely on self-administered profiling. Whereas, when we look at our consumer or our B2B panels, we like to run follow-up questions that are tied specifically into profile data to run checks. And what it does is it will cross-reference some of those self-administered profiling data points that they've put in place to confirm that that is consistent and that they have knowledge within a particular area. And we use this strategy a lot when it comes to B2B panelists. So we'll typically run knowledge-based questions just to help separate genuine respondents from pretenders. And typically how we'll do that is we'll just look at if someone is stating they're in a particular job role or industry, what we'll do is run knowledge-based questions that, generally mostly people who are in those industries or positions would only know. That doesn't eliminate, the fact that someone can look some of this stuff up. But typically what we do is we look at how frequently they're answering these questions incorrect or correct. And we really use that to just make sure that we're keeping our panel in check from a quality perspective. And then we rinse and repeat with that from the panel management side of things. The other piece that we look at, and this is more of a collaborative one with some of the clients that we work with, is looking at optimizing screener design. So we try to work with our clients to understand the exact screening criteria so we can effectively target and personalize our invitations. If we don't have an understanding of who exactly we're trying to target, that can open the door to issues down the line. So we really try to work collaboratively to understand who exactly is the audience we're trying to get. We then also ask that screeners are optimized for speed and clarity. So data quality requires a holistic approach from all parties, not just a panel company or an end client. we need to look at it as a holistic approach. And if we're constantly having very long screening processes, redundant questions, it makes it such an issue for the respondent that they're not willing to participate again. And that, to me personally, is why I think we have some of the data quality issues today, is that the user experience hasn't been optimized to a point that it's actually somewhat enjoyable for the respondent and that they feel like their time is being valued.
Yeah, and I just want to interrupt for 1 second, Kyle. Because of the design of this particular project that we were doing, we knew that optimization for speed and clarity was going to be difficult. We had a lot of screening questions to get people into the appropriate buckets, if you will, which was very challenging both for us and for Quest. Sorry.
No, and I mean that goes to say, I mean, we like to try and push to have the most optimized screening process as possible, but that's not always our say, and sometimes we just have to work with the client as best as we can to try and optimize that process as much as possible. But another tactic we take is for fraud prevention is really just looking at on the incentive level. So we always try to align our compensation with time and effort. We're not trying to run surveys at the lowest CPI possible. And, if the incentive doesn't match the time and the effort that we're expecting from the respondent, you can almost guarantee that only fraudsters are going to participate. So if we value their time, we incentivize them correctly, that has them coming back consistently to, participate in our surveys. If we really just try to maximize margin, it's a very short-sighted approach to take from a data collection and panel management side of it. So we try to align our incentives to the time and effort of the respondent. We then also look at alternative incentive options. This is one that we've seen that is quite interesting on the B2B respondent level, especially within those types of studies, is a lot of participants from who participate in B2B studies are more interested in charitable donations or industry publications or even access to the report post fieldwork as opposed to just a financial incentive. So there's a bunch of unique ways that you can incentivize B2B respondents that help combat fraud, because we know that someone who's trying to do this is typically looking for a financial gain when they're trying to participate in some of these surveys from a fraudulent perspective. But when you offer different incentives, that really can combat it, especially on the B2B studies that we've run. And then, we also try to segment our incentives by audience. So I think this is, again, very important when we look at B2B studies. You have to understand that each target audience is going to have a different set of expectations for incentives. So we try to cater our strategy to those expectations. So, we understand that lawyers and doctors are probably going to want a higher incentive for their time as opposed to, say, mid-level management on a very high incidence type study. So we really try to incentivize our respondents to match the target audience that we're getting outside of just the time and effort that they spend in the survey.
Hey.
So the key to our success on this project was, to be perfectly honest, communication. Because we have a long-standing relationship with Quest, we have very open communication, and that allowed us to take immediate corrective action when some of those data integrity issues surfaced. I mean, preventing fraud is not just in Quest's purview, it's in everyone's purview. So we have to be aware of it. We have to have enough trust in them that they're doing what needs to be done, and they have to have enough trust in us as the research firm to listen and take action when issues arise and help us understand that's not necessarily fraudulent, or that does look fraudulent. So we're looking at a variety of different things that could flag someone as fraudulent, and the feedback loop that we have helps us improve not only the respondents and the data for this particular project, but also helps Quest and other panel providers with the overall health of the panel. And again, continues to build on that trust loop, and the feedback, really is critical for the relationship that we have in place. The other part of this is kind of client trust. So we try to avoid what we call black box research. We are working with our client on a regular basis. In this case, they were fully aware going in that we anticipated some data collection challenges, and as we had those issues surface, they were kept apprised. So they knew what was going on. It built more trust with them. Obviously, there were concerns, but we preemptively addressed a lot of those concerns, saying, here are the tools we're using, here are the actions we're taking to make sure that you have trust in the final deliverable. The firms that are doing this well are transparent, they're methodical, and they're accountable to the client. And it's really in everyone's best interest. The client wants to trust the data, the client wants to trust us, and of course we want to continue building that trust with Quest, so that we can stay ahead of both any technological attacks that might happen, or the more manual fraudulent attacks. And that's typically what we saw more of in this particular project.
Yeah, and just to add on that as well, I mean, I'm always weary of any provider that says they have very, very low scrub rates or fraud rates at all. I mean, it's something that exists. I think there are different ways that we can combat it, but anyone who's ever purported to not have any fraud issues with running an online panel, I think is one to be weary of. It's something that exists. It's going to continue to exist in any form of online business or space. And we always, as researchers and as panel companies, have to stay on top of the threats and the trends. But it's going to exist. So that is the reality, is working collaboratively together with whether it's an agency or an end client or a panel company. Everyone needs to work as a collaborative, take a holistic approach when it comes to fraud and data quality. And that's really how we're going to combat it. If you just point fingers, you really don't get anywhere in the end. I think what we need to do is work as a team. And hopefully in the future we can continue to fight this good fight against a fraud.
Well, and to build on that, Kyle, we use more than one panel provider. There are some samples that some providers do well and others not so well. And anytime we hear that, it's an instant red flag. It's instantly like that really stretches the credibility of whomever that is, and makes us, kind of hurts the trust that we might have, because if something does arise and they're then going to push back and say, well, we don't have fraudulent respondents, just makes it that much more difficult.
Hey, we have another poll. What is your biggest concern around data quality? And that should pop up on your screen right now, so you can take a second to answer that and see the results in the chat. Oh, it keeps changing on me, so I'm not going to announce. But you can take a look at the chat. Okay. And I will move on here.
All right. Yeah. So we get on to the future of fraud prevention. So I think when we look at threat or ally, we're obviously referring to AI. And I think we can all agree that it is a threat when it comes to fraud. But we also need to consider it as an ally when we look at fraud prevention. So a lot of the res tech tools out there today already utilize AI tools, in their toolbox. And that will only continue to grow as AI adoption increases. But an interesting take that I thought about the other day was from the open end perspective, which traditionally, when we look at, and when I mentioned earlier about not all fraudulent data is bad quality. A lot of the time, some of the fraudulent data we see is great quality, or we'll see open ends that have been generated via AI. As we tend to get more adoption in the future, as most of you probably seen on your phones, your laptops, is there's a lot of AI integration tools that exist today. So I think in the future, when we look at open ends, it may not be necessarily a bad thing if AI has used some form of editing to handle an open end. As it stands today, that's probably not a popular thought, but I think as we go and look down the road in the future, we will have more AI integrations in a lot of the tools that we use, whether it's our phone, survey platforms, whatever it may be. I think that's an interesting piece to keep in mind as we approach more full adoption from an AI perspective. But the other thing to highlight, and I think again, is this need for collaboration, and that's important today, and it'll continue to be important in the future. We've worked with clients that have removed respondents for various reasons, and they didn't actually provide us with any of the reasoning behind it. They just had told us to remove these types of respondents. We graciously accepted. We probably pushed back a little bit, but we removed them and we replaced them in some instances. But when we take this collaborative or holistic approach as an industry, and an analogy I'll look at is like with your garbage or your trash in your house. If you just bag your trash up and you throw it in the garage, and never come back to look at it again, your garage is going to get full of garbage pretty quickly. And that's how I tend to look at it from an industry perspective. If we're not working collaboratively to give us the signals that we need to flag respondents, to blacklist them, to remove them from the panel, how are we know is, and I'm not going to refer as panel companies as garbage men, but in this analogy I will, how are the garbage men or women supposed to come get the garbage and take it out, right? So we need to have that open feedback loop. We need to know all the information. We love to get raw data. We have to manage not only data quality and fraud prevention, we also have to manage customer service with panelists, right? So when we get someone who's removed from a survey, we need to communicate the messaging to them, especially if all other flags on their profile are indicating a verified respondent or a good participant in any of our surveys. So that feedback loop needs to remain open today and in the future, and I think it'll be prevalent as much today as it will be in the future. So that's really what we got to work on today, is not only leveraging AI technology, but good processes going forward that we continue to use today.
Yeah, and to build on that, one of our key flags when we're looking at open-ended responses is this response is too good. It's clearly not how normal people speak or write, using words that, I was an English major. I'm fairly well read, and words that I'm like, I don't even know what that means. And when do a Google search on it, and it's like it's used in the right context, but it's not how normal people speak. So we're often not only looking for gibberish, but we're looking for responses that are too good. And when we're talking about fraud prevention, the main thing to remember is this is an active, ongoing process. It's not happening automatically. It's not happening in the background. We're constantly looking at this. We're working with Quest to be aware, to continuously improve, and to feed that ongoing collaboration so that we have, at the end of the day, the best quality sample possible and the best quality data set possible. So we're investing in tools. Quest is investing in tools. We're constantly refining our practices from a screening perspective, from a data collection standpoint, from a data quality and quality assurance perspective. And we're looking at and staying alert to new threats. I'm certainly not promising that every data set is going to be 100% free of fraud, but we are promising transparency. We're promising responsiveness. We're promising that, if a client brings an issue to us, we are diligent and looking at the data set with them, so that everyone at the end of the day walks away with trust that the data and the insights are real. The more we can do this, the more the insights that we share are actionable, the more the insights that we share are smart and sharp and meet the needs of the end client. And that's really what we're looking for here at the end of the day.
Great. So one more poll. Do you currently use AI in your fraud detection processes? So that should be up there right now. And we'll wait for the responses to be submitted. Okay, and you can take a look again at the meeting chat to see how people are responding. All right. Thank you, Ken and Kyle. We do have some time for a Q&A. And I do see one question in the chat that I'll read out in 1 second. So we had a question from Connie. I'm just trying to get back to it here. Why are niche audiences more subject to fraud? Kyle, I don't know if you want to tackle that one first.
Yeah, I can tackle it.
Yeah.
So it depends. I mean, like a lot of projects that we get with our clients, we try to get as much information as possible out of them. And typically in a lot of cases, what we get is kind of the general specs of who the target audience is. And we may not have information on specific quotas, whether that's brand or job positions, whatever it may be. Sometimes that's where we may be fully feasible in a particular area, but struggle in certain areas or quota groups that we're trying to target. So the typical process we take when we look at targeting a niche audience is, we tend to try and use a pool of respondents that have a good, history of participating, haven't been flagged for any data quality issues in the past. But as we kind of get towards the end of field work, we ultimately want to deliver for our clients. So what we do is we extend our reach, and that may just be within a panel, that may be within different recruitment sources. So you're really kind of opening the doors up in some instances to have access to respondents that you may not have all the profiling data on. So for example, we may have rich profiling data for a good percentage of our panel. There's a good portion of it that have filled out the very basic information. And when we look at some different aspects, whether it's a consumer study or a B2B, we may not have the full profiling information to say whether or not they would target or not. So in some of those instances, what we'll do is we'll cast a wider net in terms of trying to deliver for our client and reach those audiences. And with that comes, some of the issues that we mentioned previously with potentially having bad open ends or not having correct knowledge in certain areas. So that's what panel companies and sample companies will do to reach more difficult audiences. We have a good set of profiling data as it exists, but if we've seen bids come across our table that are targeting a very niche quota group, and if we can't tell them that we've got profiling on it, because that's just not true. And if anyone else tells them, that's again something probably a red flag to look for. But those are, that's something we struggle with as a company, is we want to deliver for our clients, but there are very niche audiences that we try to reach. And unless you're a specialized panel within a certain vertical, you may not have access to get that particular audience. So what we do is we try to cast open a wider net. We try to keep it dialed in as much as possible. But the reality of field work is that, at times when we're coming up to deadlines, we're falling short in certain quotas. That's some of the strategies we take. So it just opens up the door to potentially either fraud or lower quality data. And again, that's why we try to work collaboratively with our clients and to let them know that, keep on top of data cleaning. Let us know what you're seeing, if there's issues, anything, and keep that feedback loop open so we can make sure we're staying on top of it for anyone that we have invited to your survey.
There's also a fairly simple response to that question is, often with niche audiences, we have to offer a higher incentive. And these survey farms or click farms, these folks are in constant communication. If they learn that the incentive is higher, it snowballs and you get more fraud simply because they can get a higher payment for it.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. We also have another question in the chat from Matt Richardson. It's a little long. I would point you guys to it. I can still read it out. Bear with me, but also please take a look at it. With so many synthetic data tools entering the market and attracting PE dollars, alongside the internal res tech developments from industry leaders, intentionally trying to blur the lines between real respondents and reliable synthesized ones. Do you see this as a problem where the industry building the tools that are actually making the fraud problem worse as the detectability gap narrows with each new synthetic iteration? Ken, I'm going to give this one to Kyle. He's been investigating synthetic data recently, so he might have an answer for this. I
Yeah,
hope
I
he
guess
does.
this one's a bit near and dear to my heart. No, I've done a couple test cases on synthetic data and will continue to do so. One of the big kind of messages that we've always said in many of these presentations or in our investigations is garbage in, garbage out rings very true to any form of synthetic data. If we are, whether it's, and there's two different types of synthetic data when we look at it. There's the augmentation or the modeling aspect of it, which is really taking existing data set and boosting it or amplifying it. There's then the persona or digital twin side of it, which is really typically built on like an LLM or some form of machine learning that's taking previous data and actually creating new data based on the questions that it's being asked. Or so if any, in both situations, I think the data quality that you're feeding these models or that you're training, the machine learning tool to impute some of these results is very, very important. I do see in the future a lot more of data collection being geared towards training some of these models. So I think data quality is going to play a very big, important part in how we use some of these tools. But if you're using garbage data to start with, then no matter how much synthetic data you produce, it's not going to give you data that you're confident in and insights that you're confident in with your clients to make actionable, to take action with. So yeah, you really have to look at it from a quality perspective, make sure that if we want to go down the rabbit hole of exploring synthetic data, which I think will have some use in the future with what we do as researchers, you really need to be vigilant on the data quality perspective and make sure you stay on top of that and only use the highest quality data.
And if you had anything to add, you don't, that's totally fine.
No, that was
Okay.
pretty complete.
Okay, great. I have a question for you guys regarding the collaboration loop that you touched on, Ken. What lessons from this collaboration could inform industry-wide standards for B2B sample validation?
Oh, I mean, the lessons really are know what you're asking. The more complex, the more niche some of these markets are, the more diligent we have to be. And that not always, but often are in some of the B2B audiences that we're, doing more and more survey work with. So we have to understand as we're designing the survey, what we're asking for and who we're targeting so that we can have these types of conversations and not have to wait until the end and go, wow, I have really, really bad data. I can be aware of it and alert for those fraudulent respondents.
Kyle, if you want to add, or I can move on. No?
No, I think Ken hit it pretty good there.
You did. And just to build on that, Ken, what would you say how have client expectations changed around data integrity the last few years? And what kind of pressure does that put on you and data providers as well?
I mean, not all that long ago, we weren't really talking about data integrity. Things were at a point where, it was more so we were talking about data quality. And then, things just started to grow that we were seeing more and more fraudulent responses that clearly were, kind of industrialized, if you will, and coming in bunches. So it's only been fairly recently when we're doing survey work that we are proactively talking about some of the data integrity issues with our clients. Now, we've always talked about data quality, but data integrity is honestly a fairly new topic. And again, we talked about this. They're often coming at it from a technology perspective, from an AI or bots perspective. So there's still some learning that's going on that, in fact, these are fraudulent people.
Right. Okay, great. Kyle, knowledge-based screening, excuse me, that's something you emphasized as more reliable than demographics. What's a good example of a question that successfully exposes a fraudulent respondent? Sorry to put you on the spot there with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can pull one exactly off the top of my head, but what we've done in the past is we've looked at some of the targeting data or the profiling data that we collect, especially on the B2B perspective. And what we do is try to craft questions and probe deeper in certain areas to understand what additional profiling points we can get on these respondents, as well as, how can we test their knowledge within a particular industry or job title. So a lot of the cases, again, this is kind of leaning into AI of how we use it, but we'll leverage AI as a tool to help determine what some of these knowledge-based questions might be. So I took a wide variety of courses when I was in university, typically all around business. I can answer a lot of accounting questions. I can answer HR questions, but as soon as you start to probe a bit deeper, it becomes a bit more difficult. So that's where, we can start to understand and know what we don't know, and take some of the knowledge that exists out there via leveraging AI and creating some of these knowledge-based questions and screening that we can do to test against it, against our panelists. And again, what we look at is consistency across the board. It's not just a one-off where we take it and leave it. We tend to look at this over the lifestyle or the life cycle of a panelist. So again, if someone's telling us that they're in accounting and then later they're filling out industry or talking that they have decision making authority over marketing, but they're in a $100 million company, we typically know that accountants aren't crossing over into the marketing department. Maybe in small businesses, but not in the corporate world. So those are types of things we look at. We cross-reference and then make those checks based on what they answered the first time. And then again, we used some of the knowledge-based screening questions that we can really determine whether someone may know what they're talking about.
Okay, great. And we definitely share that with Martec when we're working with them. So
Absolutely.
on your side, Ken, what can research firms do to foster the transparency and that trust with panel providers without crossing into micromanagement or distrust? Any advice?
It goes back to the open lines of communication. It's certainly easier in situations where, I mean, we've been working with Quest for years. So having those open lines of communication is much easier than, trying to work with a new panel. And it's really on both parties to be open to the responses that might be coming from each other. So we have to trust Quest that, hey, we know that this is not in fact fraudulent. It's just a bad quality respondent, and you guys, I mean, have to be able to hear when we say there's a pattern here. So it's really goes back to those open lines of communication.
And just to add on that too, is working collaboratively with each other is very important. So when we've done so for as long as we have trust in when they tell us that they're removing someone for a valid reason, that we trust what they're saying. And in a lot of instances, we've seen in the past, if we keep that line of communication open, it can help, determine some of the issues that we're facing in field work today. For one example, I think we talked about this a while back when we were putting together some of this was, we did a plumber study, I think a couple of years ago, and I remember a couple of respondents being removed for profanity, and the open ends were actually what you would expect to be of a plumber. It wasn't, perfect spelling, very eloquent in their response in the open end. And that's, understanding your audience and working with the end client or the consultancy that you're working with, just to understand, okay, who is the audience, and how can we collaboratively work together? And in that instance, we had to push back to the client to say, well, is there any other indications that you're flagging this respondent for aside from profanity within an open end? So, that's one thing to point out, and one interesting kind of story that we've seen over the years, that sometimes, the human element of it should be trusted more, spelling mistakes. It doesn't have to be perfect grammar. Those are the things today that we need to be wary of, is when you see that perfect open end answer that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Sometimes the open ends with profanity are some of the best insights.
Exactly.
So this particular case wasn't Martec working with Quest. It was, I believe, someone else, because you have to take people at face value in many cases, and we work with a lot of those types of trade audiences, and they're not the most polished people in the world, and you have to accept
it wasn't Martec either, I can remember.
All right. Okay, great. So we're about at the 45-minute mark, which is perfect for our viewers and for you guys. I think we got a lot of great things from that discussion. So thank you both. I'll just share my screen here one more time so I can put up the thank you message that we've got. Oh, one moment as I get there. There we go. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you want to reach out to Ken, there's his email address there, and Kyle's as well. The article that was referenced is published online on both of our websites. You can also follow us on LinkedIn for more updates regarding data integrity and our future discussions on it. And we also have the case study that we plan on publishing and putting out soon. So we'll be back with that. But thank you, everyone, and see you later.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.